Hello everyone and welcome back to the Blender 102 class where we are continuing with our character model. Today's class we begin work on the head. Now the way I had scheduled the class was that we would work on the head this week and next week. And really, how far we get is dependent on a lot of things, primarily user feedback, how people are able to pull this off, because I think a lot of people will agree, who've been into modeling for a while, that getting a head to look right can be one of the more frustrating things when you're just getting started. There's just a lot of things to consider. It's really not that hard. In fact, I think the way that I'm going to be presenting it here, I think most of you will take to it just fine. I don't think you'll have a difficult time at all, but we'll just kind of see where we go. In today's class specifically, my goal is to get the mouth done, the nose done, the area around the eyes done, and kind of branch out from there. If we get to the ears, then I'll be satisfied. So that next week we can kind of round out the rest of the head, get everything attached into the neck, handle any remaining tweaks over the body that we want to, and then shape out a hairpiece for our character. So that's kind of the overview of where I want to go right now. So without any further ado in that regard, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the way I will generally tackle a head is very much like certain other body parts, such as the hands and feet. I'll often just handle the head as an entirely separate object and not worry about the attachment, not worry about number of edges and all that until I get to the point where I'm creating a neck to join the two pieces together and then move on from there. And that's the way I'm going to be approaching this. It's not like I'm starting off the head knowing that I have X number of edges around the neck and thinking that that's what I need to join to. We're keeping things much simpler than that. So I'm going to begin by taking my 3D cursor and placing it here at the lip just with a regular plain Jane right click. Let me also press the N key. I'll turn on my screencast keys in case I do anything particularly interesting in that regard. Also, let me go up to my 3D cursor location. I'm going to take my X coordinate and just zero that out entirely. So I know we're right on the center line. I'll go ahead and press N to hide away. And just for now, I'm going to hit Control and the up arrow key to make my screen nice and big. Now in the side view, I'm going to right-click and place the 3D cursor right here at the end of the lip, so you can see where that positions that in 3D space, right at the front of where I want the lip to be, because the lips and the mouth are really where I'm going to begin this modeling process today. Now, as sort of a preface, this is only one of many ways one could go about modeling out a character's mouth. I don't really think there's a right or wrong way to go about the modeling process, but there are certainly right and wrong considerations, or you could probably call them best practices, for the end geometry that you wind up with once you're finished with your model. So that's really going to be one of the big things I'm going to focus on here, is getting the right geometry. You're going to do that. You're going to get that proper geometry by creating a series of loops that radiate out from any holes in the face. What holes do I speak of? Literally, those would be the mouth and the eyes. Those would be your most important ones. To a smaller degree, the ears, even a little bit for the nostrils, but not too much. The reason you get these radiating edge loops is because they animate very, very nicely. If you want to create things like creases in the face for smiles, or proper phonemes, which is the shapes that your mouth will make while you're talking and while you're producing various sounds with your voice, having concentric edge loops that funnel their way down toward that opening will make that much, much easier. And I think you'll find that they also make the modeling process easier, because once you have that base geometry in, getting a very human-like shape from your resultant geometry is really not that hard. So, with our 3D cursor in place, and verify that we have our object selected and that we are in edit mode, let's go ahead and build this as a part of our existing object. Let's go ahead and go to Add and bring in a mesh plane. And you can see that just pops up here right in the center of the view. If you're going to be following along and modeling with me today, once again I would ask that you go ahead and hit the participate button over inside of BuzzNet so I know who's following along and who isn't. It does allow me a higher degree of accuracy to figure out how long I need to give pauses and that sort of thing. Now I'm going to jump over to the side view, and of course this is a plane, and we automatically just have a few vertices here. For starters, go ahead and hit G and just pull this off to the side. Because we have clipping on, that'll go ahead and create a center line. You can go ahead and move it back as soon as you do that. And you see what that does. Because we have clipping, it just makes a nice little center line for us. In the side view, I'm going to do a couple of things. Let's rotate this so that it is kind of parallel to the line formed right there by the front of the lips, and then of course it would make a lot of sense for us to scale this down. Now I know that it got really tiny. Don't worry about how small it gets, you just don't want it to get razor thin in the x-axis. So let me jump back over here to the side view. We'll move this to where it sits right on top of the shape for the lips, and I guess I'll scale it down just a little bit more, maybe about like so. Let's come over here to the front view, and I can grab these two outermost vertices here, and let's just hit G, and I'll slide these. I'll bring them in, and I'm trying to basically create a simplified version of the shape of the lips. So I'll go ahead and place this upper vertex right here at the top crown point of the lips. Also, let me hit Control Up arrow, and I'm going to turn off smooth for the time being. I just don't need to see that smooth result right now. And when I'm done, I'll hit Control Up arrow again to hide that view back out. Now let's also go into wireframe, because really all we're doing right now is just outlining the shape of the lips. You can go ahead and start creating the lower lips too. There's a trick that I generally use when I do this, is I'll switch over to edges and go ahead and extrude an edge down just a tiny little bit, because you're going to end up getting rid of the face created here in just a moment. So do like a little baby extrusion. Jump over to the side view, and let's go ahead and frame up on that. And what we want to do is grab this lower edge and just pull it down to where the lower lip starts, as you can see here. So in the front view, we've got this nice edge that begins the portion of the lower lip. Let's go ahead and hit extrude again, and we'll extrude this down to the end of the lower lip, jump over to the side view, and I'm just going to slide this back. Now why am I sliding it back? Take a look at the front view, and you'll see that line for the lower lips. That same line surrounds the lips here in this axis. We just slid it back so that the edges, I want to say the two vertices, but this edge will now coincide with the same location in both directions. I can do the same thing with this edge actually as well. Just slide it straight back a little and rest it right on top of the drawing. Now, once we have this little band of detail in place, my next step would be to jump over to faces, grab this face here in the middle, and just nuke that out. So now we have this little gap. We have basically an upper lip and a lower lip, and we're going to be combining these together here in just a moment, but we're not going to rush that. So essentially right now, all we want to do is create the remaining geometry to turn this into a loop of faces that go around the lips. So let's jump back over to the front view for just a moment. We'll start with the upper lip, and then we'll grab the lower lip and do the same thing. So let's just start with the upper lip, grab this outer edge here, and I'm going to keep the geometry very simple at first. So we'll extrude out once, say to right about here, about halfway down the lip, immediately go over to vertices, get the shape looking right in the front view. Also, you will want to go ahead and create a little more of an outward slant for this edge. So you'll notice our center edge is essentially vertical. Our next edge leans out a little bit more, and the next one out leans out even further. You want to do this so that when we get all the way out to the corner of the mouth, the edge that we create will be virtually horizontal. That way we can do the same thing with the lower lip, and the two edges can meet at the very end. Now I'm not going to do another extrusion right now. I'm going to jump over to the side view and pull these vertices straight back. In fact, let's just hit G, and I'll middle mouse drag and slide that straight back until it's resting right on the line of the drawing. Bit of a tip. It is very seldom that you will get an opportunity to work with image planes that line up supremely well, especially on smaller details like the lips. So if you're ever building a character using image planes, even photographic ones, don't be too alarmed to find out that things look like they lined up at the beginning, but it turns out they don't line up later. That's a very common thing to bump into. On that note, it looks like we could probably go ahead and slide this back a bit as well, and these probably both come back a little further. Do a little bit of averaging here. So let's take a look there. That's a pretty thick line, so we'll kind of aim for the lower side of it, and that starts to line up a little better in this view. Now, I would like, in this direction, for this slant to lean a little bit more forward. Not terribly so, but maybe just a little bit more than it is now. I may change my mind on that and move some vertices around here in a moment. At this particular juncture, it's a little difficult to tell what we've got. So taking a look at this in the 3D view, I mean, you start to get the impression of lips, but it's just a little too soon to really make much sense of it. So don't bother yourself too terribly with making sure everything looks perfectly kosher at this stage. Let's grab this edge one more time, and this time I'm going to extrude all the way out to the corner of the mouth. Jump over to vertices, and we'll go ahead and just make this essentially horizontal. And I'll grab both of these vertices, switch over to the side view, and slide those back. And it looks like we've got a little bit of a trade-off in location here, so I'm just going to pull these back to kind of an average location to reach the corner of the mouth. It'll have to be up a little in terms of the side view. So something about like that I think looks pretty good. So I think now would be a perfect time to give a quick ready check for people to kind of catch up with this point. You'll see this looks kind of like a mustache, vaguely like the shape of an upper lip, but we still have a ways to go. Alright, so now we'll move our attention over to the lower lip. So let's go ahead and just jump over to the front view. And I'll try to keep the number of extrusions the same. You do not have to have the same number of edges in the upper lip as the lower lip. Primarily because these edges are going to terminate at the back of the throat, really. Because what you're doing is you're making what you can look at as the outer edge of a hole, which is going to extrude into the character's head. Which makes the roof of the mouth a really nice place to terminate excess geometry. It'll terminate very, very cleanly. But for now, since we have so little geometry, we're going to keep the number of edges pretty consistent. So let me go ahead and switch over to vertices, and we'll pull this down, pull this up. Again, we're just sort of tracing out that shape of the lips here in the front view. That looks decent. Let's go over to the side view, and we'll slide this back and this back. I am kind of averaging out the shape a bit, so I'm just assuming there's going to be little discrepancies with the pen strokes on the image planes. And let's go back over to the front view, grab an edge and extrude. And move vertices. I'll go ahead and grab both these vertices, jump over to the side view, and slide back. Now I don't really want to join these vertices themselves. Really what I'd like to do here is go ahead and grab either one of these edges, or both of them actually, and press F, and close the shape up in that way. So now we've got a loop of edges, being this loop and this loop, that go all the way around the mouth, and they kind of set the stage for how we can shape the lips from this point on. Now obviously if we want nice rounding, we're probably going to need more edges flowing inward toward the shape. But let's start out just by adding an edge loop here right down the center of the lip. So hit Control R and just click an edge right here in the middle. And if you jump to the side view, you can already cheat a little bit just by moving this edge very generally forward. Now it makes the corner of the mouth look weird in most cases, but if we hit Control up and we turn smoothing on for just a minute, you'll see we've already got a pretty decent approximation of human lips starting to form here. So I'm going to grab this edge that I created here at the very corner of the mouth, and I'll slide that back a little bit. So that wasn't coming forward, but everything else really was fine with coming forward. I can grab this edge here at the front of the lip, like so. Let's go to the side view, and we can pull that out a little farther. Same thing here with the one on the lower lip as well. Maybe grab this cross edge here, and just kind of pull that down and forward. Switch over to vertices, grab this little guy here and pull that down. And you see we're tracing out that shape for the lips very, very cleanly, very easily. Now, at the corner of the mouth is always going to be a little bit of a pain. You will end up with a lot of geometry that's very, very close together here. So expect that and be ready to work with it. The trick is to keep that geometry as clean as you can. Don't let your quads get too skewed like this. Like you see how this quad is more or less shaped like a triangle. That can and often will lead to weirdness in your overall shape. But we can pull detail very, very close together, and the end result in the smooth is just going to be a bit of a creasing, which is exactly right. That's what you'd want to see there. So that's good. Now you can make lips appear fuller if you grab like this little vertex here at the front corner and you bring that just a little more forward. It does something kind of interesting. The lips tend to indent. You get this little raised spot at the corners. I don't remember the name for that off the top of my head. I'm sure if I looked it up, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's what it is. But there's more to it than that. Just getting this, very, stereotypical lip shape in that direction is one thing. But if you take this vertex and also move it forward, you'll often find that you get that nice kind of bit of cleavage there between the lips that looks really good. Do the same thing with the lower lip as well. It just makes everything appear fuller. Okay, now, really, in terms of just creating lips, this is not a bad place to stop temporarily. I would advise against just continuing to add and add and add detail to make your lips look amazing, because what you're going to find is that as you add detail to the eyes, you'll need to run that detail down the cheek and into the lips. So just leave the lips as simple as you can, knowing that detail will be coming soon. What I've done here is I've built something that is, it's very convincing. And you could look at this. You could probably show this to just about anyone and say, hey, what's this? And they go, oh, it's like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And that's what you're looking for. But as we continue to add extra detail to the face, we'll be terminating a lot of edges here. So don't get carried away in adding detail just yet. It's too soon. So what I want to do now is move over and start working on one of the eyes. But first, let's go ahead and do a quick ready check for people to catch up to this point. Okay, so my goal here, I don't know if I ever actually said this, but my goal is to give you the basics of modeling a character's face in a very, very simple way that you should have an easy time following if you've just begun to work with Blender. So, all right, let's move on to the eye. Let's jump over here to the front view. Obviously, there's some nuances to the shape that we're not following. We can do a little bit of adjustment to make things a little bit neater. If I grab faces, for instance, grab like these faces here. Let's go ahead and show X-ray. I could move these straight up so they're a little closer to the actual corner of the mouth, and that does make things nicely line up with the drawing quite a bit better. I can grab vertices and close that in a little bit. So just make a few adjustments so that we're lining up a little more cleanly with the drawing, with the understanding that that will become easier to do the more edges we add to the lips. So now, let's begin with our eye. To begin the eye, I'm going to place the 3D cursor right up here on top of the eyelid, and the great thing about modeling an eyelid is that we are essentially going to be creating another mouth. Is there a reason that you're using ortho in all these lessons? I thought you said in the fundamentals it's better not to work that way. I've been working in perspective view, and it makes it a bit more confusing to follow, as yours always looks different because of ortho mode. Should I change, or should I start using ortho as well? Right now, the shape of things in ortho is not particularly important. Because, what we've got is very, very simple. Once we get to a point where we're adding much more geometry, we're going to do a lot of double checking in ortho to make sure things don't look a little squarish. You will find that if you just work in the front view and the side view and never cross-reference with a perspective style view, that your models will tend to look very boxy, and they will lose a lot of their cylindrical flow because the human body has a lot of curvature to it, and you'll lose a lot of that if you're just working in the front and side views. Nevertheless, at this particular moment, we're really only lining a very low number of vertices up with the front view and the side view. And now if you go back and actually take a look, pay attention to the previous lessons we've got to up to this point. Yeah, I do some panning around in orthographic view, and I'll just kind of double check the shape here, and then oftentimes I'll just pop it into perspective, get a quick pan around, and then go back to my front and side view, because that's what we have for reference are these orthographic shots. Okay, so we've got the 3D cursor right here at the top of the eyelid. We've got it. Let's go ahead and put it at the top of the eyelid here as well. So essentially in the same place. If it's off by a little bit, it doesn't matter. This is just where we're going to begin some geometry. And let's see what happens if I add another plane. I have a sneaking suspicion. Yeah, it's crossing over the center line, which is not really a problem, but you do need to make sure you temporarily turn off clipping for just a moment and then scale this down. And then you can turn clipping back on. If you don't do that, then of course you won't be able to break away from the center line. So you want to make sure that you just temporarily deactivate clipping. Now let's jump over to the side view, and we've got a little bit of work to do here. We're going to rotate this. Let's make sure we have the whole thing selected, by the way. And we did. Ooh, you see what's happened here? I have inadvertently performed some sort of extrusion, so double check, make sure you don't do that. Alright, that looks good. Little face handles are gone off the edges. Definitely watch out for that sort of thing. Let's go ahead and rotate this around. Now, I'm just kind of averaging the direction of the eyebrow right now, but this does need to be quite a bit smaller, so we'll just scale it down. Switch over to vertices, and I'm just placing these right at the top of the eye and fanning out the edges. In the end, that's going to be the big thing we're doing. It's just creating a radiating loop of edges that will wrap around the eye. Just like with the mouth, it's very, very easy to overdo this. So for starters, I would suggest you make this very, very simple. You can always add more edges very quickly with just a couple of clicks of the mouse and start rounding things out. For now, make it as simple as you can get away with and still understand the shape. This will also help with the modeling process. It'll help you get it right and help you keep the shape a little more consistent because, well, the simple answer is you have fewer vertices to work with. As long as we make sure, for instance, that these two vertices line up with this point in the front view, and when I switch to the side view, they look like they're generally in the same location, then I'm doing a good job. So I can take these vertices and probably move them a bit forward. Let's jump back to the front view. I'll grab edges, and I'm going to extrude this out toward the corner of the eye. Go to the side view. Obviously, this needs to be slid backwards. So to right about there. And I'll switch over to vertices, and I'll let this kind of have a little bit more of a tilt so that by the time we make it to the corner of the eye, it's going to be much closer to being horizontal. We can grab this edge, tap E to extrude, check the side view again, and once again, we have that. Let's go ahead and switch over to vertices. I'll make sure I commit my change. Switch over to vertices, grab, slide back a ways. We'll probably slide this back a ways as well. I would go ahead and make sure that as you get toward the corner of the mouth, you let this face become thinner, become quite a bit more narrow. You've just got so much geometry is going to have to start wrapping around the side of the head that you can make things much more complicated for yourself if this face gets very, very wide in a front view. Alright, same thing. We're going to extrude about the same number of times. So let's get one extrusion that goes about halfway down. And you're going to run into a very interesting situation with our particular reference setup. In that, from the side view, if you hadn't quite figured it out yet, at this point we're wrapped around the inside of the eye, and these two vertices should actually be inwards a little bit. You will probably have to just guesstimate how far in to take them. And then when you're finished, you'll take the entire eye shape that you've created and gauge if that's going in far enough or if you need to pull it in or take it out a little bit. Okay, so back over to the front view and back over to edges. Once again, we'll do an extrusion. I'll go ahead and switch over to the side view, and we'll pull this back to the kind of inferred, I hit extrude again, by the way, you don't want to do that. We'll pull this back to kind of the inferred corner of the eye. Now, I'm sort of reading that by following the flow of the eyebrow in and the flow of the cheek in, which tells me the corner of the eye should sit somewhere in this general location. So you just kind of mentally follow those lines and approximate that in your head. As a modeler, you're going to do a lot of approximation when you try to convert something two-dimensional into something three-dimensional. Back in the front view, make sure that you kind of narrow things out as you go across the top of the eye. And there we go. Now, it'd be a good time to rotate around and take a look at this in perspective. Let's go ahead and do that. It's just the catch we run into is there's so little detail here that, I mean, it's very difficult to tell if you've got it right now. So we're not going to stress about the perspective view too much, probably until we get a couple of extrusions out, maybe even to the point where they meet at the center of the nose, where it starts to look a little bit like a Kato mask. And then we'll kind of go from there. Did you think that was funny?
You amused me, yes.
Wouldn't looking at the eyelid in perspective tell you how much you should pull that back more than the side view? It could. Right now I don't have an eyeball in place, which is something that we can do here momentarily. So it's one of those things where some people will say yes and others will say no. It's easy to argue not, because at the moment, tell me what reference you have, or how can you take a look at just these two floating arcs and say, oh no, that looks natural for how far to pull that in. You don't really have anything. The only reference we're sitting on right now is a drawing that only appears in the side view. Now, if it's easier for you to tell how far to pull something back, when you, like if you look at this and you immediately go like, oh, well, obviously this should be pulled back further into the head, a few more units. Very good. My brain doesn't work that way. I do not see any landmarks in this view that I can use as a solid indication of how far to go. And if you're, and you just mentioned you think it's hard either way, expect that. At this stage of the game, you should be just approximating things. You're working very loosely. Think of it like sketching. Notice we're working with a very low number of vertices right now. It is highly likely, in fact, just expect this, that we're going to get a lot more detail in and go like, oh, well, that's not lining up like it should. This should be moved in or out or slid sideways, or I should be using suddenly my brain suddenly went dark. Using thank you, proportional editing to push and pull. I kept wanting to say soft selection. I'm like, I know that's not right. I know that's Maya. But you're going to want to use proportional editing to maybe adjust various parts of the body. But you won't be able to do that until you have more detail in. So again, a lot of my approach for modeling, we've been seeing this entire way. Get the geometry in, then make the geometry do what you want it to do. If you sit there and nitpick over the precise placement of each and every vertex as you place it, it will take you forever to create a model. If you get it really close with a few vertices, add a few more vertices and get it closer, add a few more vertices and get it closer, you will find the perfect shape, and you'll find it a lot more quickly. Okay, now that I've completely wailed on that dead horse, I'm going to assume that everybody had plenty of time to kind of catch up to this point, and I'll just go ahead and continue. So, same thing as before, we need to create a lower shape as well. Now, you could go ahead and create another plane, but what I would do is kind of the same thing we did with the mouth. Go ahead and switch over to edges, grab this edge, and extrude it all the way down to the lower part of the eyelid. Grab the vertices, and we're not doing much of a change. We're just kind of shaping them a very little bit. Jump over to the side view. Get these vertices lined up pretty close to where they need to be. And again, we're sort of averaging where the lines are in the drawing. They look good in one view and a little off in another view. Let them be a little bit off. At the end of the day, your job as a modeler is to take something two-dimensional and find a way to make it three-dimensional. You will have to interpret while you do that. Just always remember that. So now we'll grab this edge and extrude it out a little bit. This will become our first edge for the eyelid here. As soon as we have that in place, grab faces, hit X, and nuke that face out of the way. So it's just faster than having to create that geometry from scratch. We can go ahead and fan these two edges out like so. And I'll do a little bit of placement here, not much. Let's start off with the front view again. Actually, I kind of want to pull that back. I don't know why. Let's just do an extrusion. It's right about here. Switch over to vertices. I actually want to keep this a little thinner than it was, so maybe something about like so. Grab these two verts that I just created. Over in the side view, grab and slide back so that they seem to be resting pretty close to the location of the drawing. Also, be wary of looking in the side view and seeing edges that are nicely vertical. These probably need to flare out slightly, so let's go ahead and do that. Once again, grab edge, extrude, and just get it close. This needs to become the corner of the eye, so the detail is going to get very close together and very close to horizontal in this view. And in the side view, obviously these need to slide back. We'll grab the outermost vertex, make sure that's the outermost vertex, and we'll slide that back a little bit further. Then edge, edge, F. And there you go. There's a really rough corner of the eye. But a good place to start. We need to get the other side, though, so if you want to get this kind of tear duct shape, just keep in mind you will be adding a little more geometry in order to do that, which is perfectly acceptable. Let's grab this edge. We'll extrude once to right about here. Again, immediately go over to the side view, and you're just kind of inferring that this will need to wrap inward just a little bit. So I'll just pull it in just a tiny little bit. Extrude out again. I'm not going all the way in just yet like I did with the other. We're going to get a little bit of extra space here to kind of form that tear duct, which I can go and start to shape out a little. Go back over to edges, and we'll extrude once here. Let's take a look over in the side view, and it looks like I can probably grab this face, because I should have done this with both edges, but I didn't, so I'll just grab the face, which of course would be both edges, and I'll just slide these back slightly. So we get something kind of like so. And back over in the front view. I'll extrude this up, and then grab vertices, and start to make this fairly horizontal in this view. Over in the side view, we'll slide this back. And it is kind of lining up nicely in both directions, so I can just grab edge, and hit F. So that now we can turn on smooth, and we see it interprets pretty well. I mean, we can see that that's some form of a ring for an eye, like so. And I think this is a really good spot for us to do a bit of a ready check, let everybody sort of catch up. Okay, so we've got our first ring in. Now my next stage here is to go ahead and get some sort of shape in place for an eye. It's a good way to verify the location of all of your geometry. In most cases, but certainly not all cases, your eye is going to be a sphere. I say not all cases because sometimes you'll have some sort of cartoony character and the eye will be capsule-shaped, it'll be stretched in some dimension or another, it'll be kind of egg-shaped. There's all kinds of different shaped eyes for all kinds of different projects. Once generally when I'm modeling, you may come up with your own formula later, but when I'm modeling, I'll generally get this first row of edges in, just outlining the shape of the eye in the reference that I'm drawing, and then with just these, because really this is just two edge loops, if you want to look at it that way. We've got the internal edge loop and the external edge loop. I can now bring in a sphere and at least take this internal edge loop and line the vertices up right on the surface and have a really solid idea of where the eye should be placed. So let's go ahead and do that next. Now for this part, I am going to get out of edit mode altogether. So I'm going to hit tab and go to object mode. Let's also jump to the front view. I'll place my 3D cursor pretty much at the center of the eye, right about where I think a pupil should be. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer you can get, the more accurate you're going to be modeling the vertices of your eye to conform to a surface. So yeah, get it close. Let's jump over to the side view. Now, you can leave the 3D cursor sitting right on the surface of the eye because that's a solid landmark and it's easy for you to place. It may be more difficult for you to try to place the sphere, place the cursor at the center of the supposed eyeball. So in a lot of cases, I'll just start here and then I'll move and scale from that point. So let's do that. Let's just Shift A and then bring in a UV sphere. There's no reason why you can't do an icosphere if you really want to. The reason I like a UV sphere is simple. You can rotate this in the side view. And, oh, actually, let me not do that. Let's just rotate without holding down the middle mouse button. And if we hold down Control, we can get a nice 90-degree rotation. And the great thing about that is you can use this faceting to kind of get an idea of where a pupil would be, because this is already perfectly spherical. And I just find it makes positioning an eye much, much easier. So now we go to the front view. Perfect. I mean, I think this is the greatest eye we could ever hope to model to. Let's just scale this down, obviously. And you're not trying, I've seen so many beginners do this, and I think they realize right away, but they'll still do it anyway. This is not your eyeball. There are a lot of people who will scale down, and they will try to, I don't know, I guess place the eyeball right in the location of the iris. I've seen it happen. You want to kind of overlap both sides of this eye shape. So something about like so. And then also on some characters, especially stylized ones, don't be alarmed if the sphere for the eye only makes sense if it crosses over the center line. That's also something that happens quite a bit on 3D characters, and don't let it alarm you. It's just only because the eyes are sometimes stylized and so much bigger than they would be on a human being that you suddenly find out, hey, this is technically impossible because the eyes would rub together in the middle, which would be painful and wrong. Yeah, so I'll pull this just shy of the center line, mostly just on basic principle, and then go to the side view. And yeah, there are a lot of vertices here. Don't worry about that. But what if you want to open her face up in the animation? Well, Wolf Knightley, in that case, you would know in advance that you're opening the face up for whatever your reason. And you would probably need to model accordingly, or if the eyes needed to be that big, you would need to find some way to justify to the audience when they see the inside of the face why they're not touching each other. So it's just, yeah, it's kind of a disturbing thing to think about, but you would have to find some way as the artist to make that make sense to the audience. That would be your job.
But I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to mention it. People often don't realise quite how large the eyeball is.
Yeah.
Because you're only seeing like a 20, 30 degree section of it through the slot.
All right, so just a little bit of adjusting, and I've got something that is already lining up pretty closely with the vertices that we've put in place. And in this case, close is really going to be close enough. Our next step is to use this as a reference to reposition those vertices that we just dropped in. So if I hit Z, just maybe a little bit more tweakage, I can maybe slide this back a little bit to right about there. That looks pretty good. In the front view, we're getting really close to the very outermost corner of the eye, and that's a little bit disturbing, so I'm going to slide this out just a hair. But see, I can use this ring of edges to kind of figure out where an iris would be placed. So it becomes a really nice indicator. Also, just keep in mind, your motions here and your adjustments are all going to probably need to be very, very subtle at first. Okay, now solidifying everything, you can see, obviously, that we would need to make some adjustments to make this rest right on the corner of our eyeball. So let's just go ahead and do those. So I'll switch back over here to edit mode. I'm going to grab this outermost edge. You see it's just barely poking through. So we'll grab that, and we'll hit O to grab proportional editing. And then I can just hit G and roll my mouse wheel up and use that to kind of pull the corner of the eye just outside and sort of tweak the surrounding geometry. Let's grab this edge here and this edge here where we form kind of a corner. Shade back up, we'll hit G, and I'll pull down my my radius a little bit. What I want to do is kind of pull this out at sort of a tangent angle to the eyeball, so something kind of like that. And I'm going to turn off proportional editing for just a moment, at least here. I'm going to set this guy a little closer to the surface, pull this one out a little, switch over to vertices, and since I can't really see what's going on, let's go to wireframe. I need to pull these vertices out. I don't really want them to be penetrating the sphere. Not really, so we'll pull that out like so. Same thing here, just pull out, rest right outside the sphere. And see if I can find... Okay, note you can click through the geometry if you're very careful, which is pretty useful actually. Now you're going to see a lot of places where the geometry is poking through. Be really careful about trying to fix that too early. As we add more and more geometry, we'll have more points and more ways to deal with that. But for now, just kind of let it happen. My goal is to take these vertices we just laid down, and we're going to give a little bit of a gap so that we can add in some thickness to the eyelid, because we don't want our eyelid to be razor thin anyway. It also shows us a clearer indication. Now we don't really have to guess where the tear duct is and how far in to push that. We can just take this and slide it back, get it really close to the eye. Okay, so this is getting pretty close to where I want it to be. I think we're ready to kind of move on from this point. Let's do a really quick ready check for people to catch up to here. Okay, so we've got this pretty nicely lined up. We can continue to tweak as we get some more geometry in, which is kind of where we need to go before we can start to make the shape, make sense to us anyway. So let's do that. I'm going to get out of edit mode for just a moment. Let's grab our eye, since we got everything lined up and looking just about the way we wanted to. Let's just hit Control. I'm sorry, not Control H. Again, that's Maya. Just hit H, and we'll hide the eye out to get rid of that. And jump back into our geometry and hit Tab. Now, the only thing we'll want to keep in mind is that we really don't want to disturb these inner vertices too terribly much. Or if we do, just know that we're probably going to want to go back in and set them back on the surface of the eye later on at some point. So, let's go ahead and start making these into a bit more functional eyelids. We will start off in the front view. Now, what I'll generally do at this point is hit Control Tab, grab edges, and grab this outermost edge loop and just give it a little bit of an extrusion. However, you'll notice that the way Blender tries to do this extrusion, it moves everybody at the same rate. So just right click, so there's no motion to that extrusion, and then just do a little bit of outward scaling. And that's a pretty good way to get started, just to get some separation. You can now go into the front view and just start to spread things out. Now I'm going to do a little bit of averaging. I'm going to take this outer ring that we created earlier and sort of thin that out. Now, with the angle that I'm creating here, you probably want to kind of take a note of this. I'm imagining in my head lines coming out from the eye being traced down the cheek and where they would kind of flow. So this edge will probably end up flowing into the lip. This will kind of flow down the side of the cheek, also kind of down the side of the face, maybe out toward the ear and so on. And that's where I'm getting the inspiration for the angles that these will take on. Now, it looks like these kind of got pulled away from the original drawing a little bit, so I know that I'll probably have to tweak those out at some point, so I'll just be ready to do that. Now, I will also tend to keep my loops around an eye pretty tight as you get toward the corner of the eye, at least at first, and then I'll spread out from there. So we'll do that here as well. Now, granted, the side view is not going to give us a whole lot of detail here, but it does give us something to consider. Like, this stuff probably needs to come forward so it looks like it's resting where the eyebrow is sitting. These vertices seem to need to come pretty well forward to get this, to begin this curvature for the cheek. And once we have that, now would be a good time to just kind of come out to perspective, and you have to start sort of improvising and interpreting where things are going to go from here. Now I'll do this one more time with the outermost edge loop. So right about here, and we'll hit extrude and then right click and then scale out uniformly one more time. And I'll just start off here in the front view once again, grab vertices and sort of spread these out. Sort of average out some of the topology. Now we've got a landmark here in the form of the eyebrow that we can kind of aim for. So we can start kind of pulling out to that point, at least here. I'll go ahead and keep these kind of tight. Alright. And we can hit Alt, let's get out of edit mode, hit Alt-H and bring that sphere back in. And it's pretty close. We'll probably need to do a little bit of proportional editing to adjust for that once we get done. But that'll be more focused on just making something that's generally pleasing to the eye. So we've got these two rings that are really good starts for an eye. If we take a look and see how they look smoothed, I mean, again, they're doing their jobs. They're not super stellar just yet, but we're at such an early stage that they don't necessarily need to be. So I think this is a really good spot for us to kind of do a pause on, but we're just about an hour into actual class time, so I'm going to go ahead and we'll take a quick break here, and we will continue after about a 10-minute break. So if you're not quite caught up yet, this is a really good time to get to that point.